Good morning, good afternoon, buenos dias. Thank you very much for being here today. I would like to special thanks to Jose Moran and also to David for inviting me to this conversation. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's presentation. The aim for today is to give you an overview of the IGF's recent publication called What Makes Minerals and Metals Critical. I will try to give you the most important views and insights of the document, and I hope you will leave with new perceptions and also with new ideas to support your journey in understanding the criticality of minerals and metals. Now let's take a look at the agenda for today. I will go through these 4 points. I'll start with an IGF's overview. After that, I'll talk about understanding critical minerals. Then I'll go through what makes minerals and metals critical. And finally, as David already mentioned, we will have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please kindly wait until the end to ask them, or leave your questions in the chat box during the presentation. About the IGF, for those who are not familiar, the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals, Metals, and Sustainable Development is a global forum of 85 nations that are committed to leveraging mining for sustainable development. We help governments take action to develop inclusive and gender equitable practices, optimize financial benefits, support livelihoods, and safeguard the environment. Our work covers the full mining life cycle from exploration to mine closure and projects of all sizes, from artisanal small-scale mining to large-scale operations. Guided by our members' needs, we provide in-country assessments, capacity building, technical training, publications, and events to advance best practices, peer learning, and engagement with industry and civil society. At the IGF, we have the Mining Policy Framework. The MPF represents the practices required for good environmental, social, and economic governance of the mining sector and the generation and equitable sharing of benefits to contribute to sustainable development. The MPF has served as the basis for the IGF's assessment and implementation work with several member countries. In 2023, last year, IGF members ratified and updated the MPF that outlines international good practices and affirms the IGF's mandate to work on the following 6 policy areas: legal and policy environment, financial benefit optimization, socioeconomic benefit optimization, environmental management, post-mining transition, which includes closing and post-closing activities. And the last one is artisanal and small-scale mining. Parallel to these 6 pillars, we have 2. On the one hand, we have climate change, and on the other hand, we have gender equality. The IGF also works with different institutional partners to support our member states. For example, in Asia, we work with ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Here in Latin America, we work with the IDB, with the World Bank. Also, we work with the GIZ, which is German cooperation. In Europe, we work with the ILO, with the European Partnership for Responsible Minerals, and of course, we work with the United Nations. So let's start with the more theoretical material that I have prepared for today's main topic. So to give you a context, I want to show you the importance of critical minerals today. The demand for critical minerals has been driven for the most part by their role in energy transition and digital transformations. It has been driven by the global shift to clean energy, rapid digitalization, electric vehicle adoption, and expanding infrastructure needs. At this point, I would like to share with you two important facts. Number one is that to meet the Paris Agreement, overall requirements for key minerals for clean energy technologies will quadruple by 2040. Over 40% for copper, 60 to 70% for nickel, and almost 90% for lithium. Second fact is that to meet net zero emissions by 2050, total demand is expected to multiply sixfold. So as you can see, the numbers speaks by themselves. If you look at this graph, you will see that critical minerals such as copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements are essential components in many of today's clean energy technologies, from wind turbines and electricity networks to electric vehicles. Demand for these minerals is growing quickly as clean energy transitions gather pace. Critical minerals are components of every aspect of daily life, from television to mobile phones, from renewable energy to medical technologies. Wind and solar energy require more than 10 different critical minerals, while an electric vehicle needs at least six. Around 42 critical minerals are required for emerging digital devices, such as those related to information technologies and mobility. These minerals are also essential for healthcare and medical sector as key ingredients for cancer and radiation therapies, X-rays, and medical research. So, in summary, critical minerals are essential in daily life, powering technologies like smartphones, computers, and renewable energy systems. They are used in batteries, medical devices, transportation, connectivity, healthcare, and obviously sustainability. As core components of modern infrastructure, critical minerals are foundational to economic stability, technological progress, and of course, environmental resilience. As I mentioned at the beginning, this presentation is based on our recent publication called What Makes Minerals and Metals Critical. This is a practical guide designed by the IGF. The aim of the document is to support governments in defining what should be considered as strategic or critical based on a series of objective criteria such as their mineral endowments, their national development objectives, their decarbonization and industrialization pathways, etc. This is a QR code that you can scan to directly have access to this report. It is available in three different languages, Spanish, English, and French. And yeah, for more information, you can go deep into it. Well, before we dive into the key aspects of the guide, I would like to share some background information in terms of the context and the rationale behind the guide. We developed this guideline to provide governments with what to consider when thinking about the risk and also opportunities related to mineral resources. And within the context of the energy and digital transitions, we are seeing that demand for certain minerals and metals have been surging. And the twin transitions and the supply demand gap are raising concerns among countries and also adding pressures on countries and on their mineral supply chains. There is also no consensus on terminology to designate these minerals and metals that are essential and that we need for the energy and digital transitions, and also for which they have supply challenges. We can see the different terms being used, but there is no universal consensus. Against this backdrop, we conducted member consultations to understand the concerns and the priorities of our member countries. Also, taking into consideration that countries are at different levels of readiness and level of development in terms of their mineral sector. We have, on the one hand, established mining countries, but on the other hand, we also have emerging mining countries. Therefore, we conducted a series of virtual consultations last year, and then we had an exchange. We had a dialogue in person in our general meeting last year, and we also held public consultations as we were drafting and developing the guide before we made the final publication. The guideline is really to provide governments with an approach to define what and how to consider minerals and metals as strategic or critical, and or both, based on a set of objective criteria such as their mineral endowments, their national development priorities, industrial development objectives, among other criteria. Essentially, this guide is a four-step process. We will dive further into each step, but we start with understanding criticality and then moving to taking a stock and mapping risk and making the strategic decisions on what to do and then maintaining a periodic review. Now, let's move on to what makes minerals and metals critical. I would like to start by sharing a little bit of background on the member consultation I mentioned before. And this is what the consultations and the information we gathered have told us in developing the practical guide, but also informed our work in terms of what the priorities and the concerns are for our member states. And I just want to focus on the top two questions that really target the question of criticality and mineral strategy. We conducted the consultation with our members from Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean. These are the regions where most of the minerals are found and or produced. Well, if we look at the mineral strategy, it's actually split into a nice balance, let's say, in terms of having a mineral strategy. Some countries have them, some countries don't, and some countries are in the process of developing the mineral strategy. And if we were to look across the different regions, it's also nicely split 50-50, relatively speaking, with Latin America and the Caribbean leading in terms of having the mineral strategy in place at 62%, as you can see in the chart on the left, the blue and orange one. When we look at the list of critical minerals, it seems like it's suggesting that Africa is doing a bit better, with 100% of the respondents having a list of critical minerals. Africa is followed by Asia and then Latin America. There is a bit of a split on what's driving the strategy, what is motivating the strategy. The top three are beneficiation, higher revenue, and strategic positioning. Well, this provides you just with a high-level idea or concept of how we came about. What is the information and insight that informed our practical guide? So essentially, the practical guide is a four-step criticality assessment. This assessment is relevant for all stakeholders, whether if you are a country that produces or consumes. And here, actually, we refrain from using the concept of being a country that produces or consumes, but rather it's really from the perspective of those countries that have the minerals and produce the minerals, and those countries that are getting the supply from these countries. So perhaps we can call them the destination countries. Criticality is really a risk assessment, and to a similar extent is strategicality, right? What is strategic? What is critical? It is really a risk assessment. The risk of supply, the risk of resource depletion, the risk of substitutes and technological changes, just to name a few. And the guide is also designed to help governments identify the bottlenecks, where in the mineral value chain are the pinch points and the challenges, and to help governments to understand how the risks affect the country. How are the risks affecting my country? Both in terms of what should I do, how should I respond to the risk, and what options do I have? And also, what are the opportunities that I could extract from this, from what my situation is with in respect. And now let's dig a little bit deeper on step one, which is understanding criticality. As I mentioned at the beginning, there is no word definition of critical or strategic. It is a commonly used term. We can use the example of the United Nations. They recently released the guidelines on critical energy transition minerals. So this is looking at the minerals for the purpose of energy transition. Another example is the European Union. They use the term critical raw materials. These are the raw materials that you need for the purpose of the European Union economy, European Union development, and also European Union industrial objectives. So again, to emphasize, criticality is a risk assessment. It is about context. And is it for energy? Is it for everything that you need for your economic development? So it's context and also country specific. My criticality is from my perspective, from one country's perspective vis-a-vis other countries. Criticality is also time bound. What is critical for me today may not be critical tomorrow, or it may become strategic tomorrow, right? So there is this time orientation to criticality, and this is relevant. This is very, very relevant for all stakeholders, as I referred to earlier, both producing and destination countries. And also, it's important to take a holistic approach, to have a holistic understanding of criticality from the technical, the economic, and the geopolitical perspective. Some of the characteristics to consider, and they are actually interlinked, are first the demand and supply. Assessing risks associated with the demand of critical minerals involves investigating factors such as industrial demand related to energy and digital transitions, potential changes in technologies that may affect future demand, and broader mineral needs related to basic access to energy, infrastructure, construction, and urbanization, etc. And then also the production volume. Some minerals are produced in low volume because of the geological nature of a lot of the minerals and metals. They are byproducts of other major minerals and metals. Therefore, some of them are produced in low volume. And also, the minerals may have been depleted in terms of uses and applications. And I have already touched on the time factor criticality. And last but not least, it's also the position of the country in the supply chain. Is the country more of an upstream? Is it in the midstream or downstream? For upstream, it's also dependency on the export market. And then for midstream and downstream is really the destination countries needing the supply of the minerals, whether it's in raw form or semi-processed form. Now let's move to the second step, and maybe the most important one, or at least the one that requires the largest amount of work. This step should act as a foundation for strategic decision making. So to conduct the stock taking exercise, governments need to gather as much as data and information as possible from multiple sources to get a deeper understanding of their mineral resources, their uses and applications, and also global trends driving the demand of their resources. What we recommend here is to screen all minerals, of course, the metallic ones, but not only the trendy ones or those that appear on the newspapers headlines. Countries should include also non-metallic or industrial minerals because they may also have a critical importance for some countries. So for all these elements, key considerations should be covered, data should be acquired, analyzed, and resulting risk should be identified. After that, risk factors should be considered. We have identified 7 risk factors, as you can see in the central column. Um, so we have identified geological risks, production, macroeconomic and market factors, industrial development factors, fiscal and financial benefit factors, social and environmental factors, geopolitical considerations, and governance, legal and regulatory factors. Then the main outcome of this step is a comprehensive list of minerals and metals, which will then inform the strategic decision to select a mineral narrow scope on which the country might want to focus more attention. Once steps 1 and 2 are completed, the government can focus on their narrow list of minerals and metals and define what are the strategic orientation they want to develop. This strategic consideration should happen before and should inform the the design of critical mineral policies. There are 3 main categories, and number 1 is national priorities. This refers to the role that the mining sector plays or is expected to play in a national development plan. Number 2, regional initiatives, where governments need to work in collaboration with neighbors to build on each other's strength and comparative advantage. Most countries don't have a market large enough to be able to develop the world supply chain. So collaboration is absolutely essential. And then number 3, global partnerships. Governments need to ensure that all MOUs and also bilateral agreements are fair. They also need to define how to position themselves in the global value chain and what should be their global engagement. And finally, and this is also highly important, a periodic review must be scheduled because designing a policy is not an end by itself. It must be administered and forced, and progress must be measured against realistic benchmarks. The objective of this review process is to evaluate whether the initial assessment is still valid after a period and whether the administrative and enforcement tools efficiently delivered on the state objectives. There are no rules written in stone, but we recommend a review period of around 3 years, obviously in order of magnitude, as we can see in countries such as Canada or the USA. The exercise allows government to revise the strategy to reflect new realities and changes in circumstances, and also to adjust the tools in place to meet the overall objectives in a changing landscape. The review process has different key elements. The review should clearly define policy objectives, measurable targets for periodic assessment, list of critical and or strategic minerals and indicators, dedicated multi-stakeholder committee in place, sound review system for data access and collection, and as I already mentioned, a periodic review. So now that the four-step process is on track, this is the big question: what's next? So next step is to design a critical mineral strategy with a roadmap and related policy instruments. Also include incentives and mechanisms to leverage the potential opportunities from their critical minerals endowment, while properly and effectively managing risk identified in the assessment conducted under steps 1 and 2. The critical mineral strategy and the roadmap need to provide the strategic direction, priorities, and also timelines with regard to a set of well-defined objectives. The critical minerals strategy and the roadmap should include different elements, as you can see in the slide. So the strategy should include a clear role on and objective. SMART means that it should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Then risk and constraints will also be identified, including domestic factor risk, such as technical skills, environmental and social acceptance, financial resource limitations, etc., or external risks, such as potential geopolitical changes or partners that may impact your own critical minerals policy. Of course, availability of resources, human resources, financial resources, technical resources, this is really, really important to design and to implement the strategy. And finally, once again, countries should make a plan to review the assessments on a regular basis to ensure that they remain relevant over the time. Well, I would like to conclude this presentation by sharing this quote: "The race for critical minerals is the race for the future. Those who control the supply chains of these minerals will shape the next century." This is a quote from the director of the International Energy Agency, and from my view, this quote captures the urgency, opportunity, and responsibility tied to critical minerals in shaping our future. So that's it from my side. Thank you for your attention. I hope this presentation, I hope you found this presentation useful, and I would be happy to answer any questions.